Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Gaming and episode 3 of the Zero to Hero Tornado Shot Deadeye. There is a lot to cover in this episode. When I last left off, I just started my essence grind. In this video, we're going to be farming essences for an hour to get 4 to 5 divines worth of currency to target some much needed gear upgrades. I'll cover off all of the purchases I made and why as we go through the video, along with plenty of footage to show the progress through the map tiers. The video is then going to go all the way through to pushing into red maps and finally getting the first 2 voidstones by killing Eater and Exarch. There's going to be a timer present throughout the video, however I wouldn't pay too much attention to it since I am having to complete my Atlas again, so I lose quite a lot of time if I get stuck for map drops. Also, trading for lower value items and bubblegum currency has proved to be an absolute pain, and I've probably spent I think an hour to an hour and a half sitting waiting for people to respond to my trade whispers. I kind of wish I'd just done this on my main account so I didn't have the hassle of Atlas and favourite slots, but I like a challenge, and a challenge it is. There is a POE in the video description for the character at the end of the episode. I'm not going to go through the gear like I did in the last video because I am going to cover the upgrades in quite a lot of detail as we go along. The POE is also linked for the last video if you wanted to compare the two. So overall the goal for this episode was to get pretty much all of my gear upgraded if I could, transition to crit immediately and get it so that the DPS is going to be comfortable for Exarch and low risk if we wanted to farm some red map strategies. Atlas tree wise, I'm going to keep essences. Then I think what I'm going to do is go for connected maps, map drops and duplicate map nodes so that I can then toggle wandering path on and off if I either want to farm essences or I want to try and get my map pool up. So with that intro out the way, let's jump into the gameplay and the trading for the episode. So the first hour was just spent farming essences. I was essentially putting a white map in, putting the 2C essence mod on the map device, going in, picking up 3 essences and leaving. I did that pretty much non-stop for about an hour to build up a decent supply of essences. It wouldn't be enough to be able to sell lots of bulk for divines, but we can certainly split them up and sell them for decent amounts of chaos, and then if need be, convert that chaos into divine orbs. I realistically only needed 1 to 2 divines to actually get the gear I wanted to transition to crit and get things moving, and that's what I did. So once we'd finished farming up essences, we went to look at what I needed to go to crit and then purchase the items that I needed, which we'll go through next. So first thing I did was remove the onslaught nodes on the tree because I can get a charm that gives me onslaught and kill, saves me a lot of points. I also then just bought a 5C charm that gave base crit while at max power charges, since it was now time to swap to crit. So I needed to make a few purchases. I purchased a bow with crit chance, LE damage and attack speed for 30C. And then I also bought a crit damage 1920 gem. I didn't have the hint for 2020, so I had to find the 1920. I then went to the vendor in Act 2, bought power charge on crit and added that into my Manifold setup. So that was now frenzy, life tap, Manifold arrows and power charge on crit. And then finally I bought a quiver with some more damage and some crit multi. Now with my 6 link I had to drop added cold because it bricked my trinity because my bow also had a lot of cold damage on it. So we've swapped crit damage in and removed added cold. So the new 6 link setup is Tornado Shot GMP, Trinity, crit damage, Mirage Archer and Inspiration. These are the only upgrades I made at this stage, as this should comfortably see me through to late tier yellow maps, early tier red maps, and then we can maybe make some more upgrades later on. But as I mentioned quite a lot, I don't want to go crazy because a lot of this gear we are going to be replacing. In terms of funding this, I did sell some essences for some chaos orbs, sold some Val orbs, and I finally sold the Zerfies for 30C. So we're now in a good position to push further forward. So after going into the next map, I decided it still didn't feel amazing and we had some chaos left, so we may as well get a belt, a ring and a Hyrris amulet with any kind of knight that helps to finish off the build at this stage. The belt, I went for a heavy belt with life, LE damage and resist. With the ring, I needed intelligence because I was severely lacking it. Needed some life, non-channeling skills to make it more comfortable and some resists. This is then a setup I'm much more happy with. I just needed to free up 1 life node on the tree to take the 12% mana reservation mastery to be able to run the level 30 precision. So I took the build out for another spin and it definitely felt a lot more comfortable. We're obviously still on a very low budget, so it's not going to feel amazing, but I feel like with the level I've got to build at the moment, I'm fine to push on quite a few more map tiers. We then had some more essences sell, so I decided to purchase some 2020 gems. I decided to go Tornado Shot because getting that extra secondary projectile is massive. Decided to go Inspiration to get even lower mana cost to make the build feel more comfortable. And then I thought the biggest bang for my buck would be for getting 2020 Trinity. And that pretty much wiped me out for the chaos that I had, but I did still have plenty of stuff left for sale. It wasn't long after that I had my first red map drop, had a tier 11 Racecourse. Unfortunately, silly me sold all my Varlorbs trying to get currency to get my gear, so I wasn't able to corrupt it. I do bulk buy some Vals later on, but at this stage, we just ran the map to test it rather than have to wait until we got a Varlorb. So for this part of the video, I'll just let the rest of the map play out just so you can get some actual idea of gameplay at this stage, and then I'll join back up with you once the map has finished. So it didn't take too long after that to start getting the mini boss keys to drop. So we had the Unending Hunger drop first and then the Black Star. Completed both of them, as you'd expect, fairly easily. These can be fairly tough challenges, at least when you might have a build thrown together for 10C. But a month into the league, you're going to have access to much better gear for much cheaper. So we made short work of both the bosses. In between the Eater mini boss and the Exarch mini boss, I actually found my first lab trial. So I went, completed Uber Lab as expected. That was very, very simple. So then we took our last ascendancy, which is increased mark effect. And then we move on to start pushing into mid to late tier red maps. So then just coming up to the 11-hour mark, and I got to try my first corrupted T14 map. And this was really going to determine whether I felt strong enough to push to Eater and Exarch and then start farming some currency in T14 plus maps. I knew the build would get Eater and Exarch done, but I want to be able to push on this gear to complete my Atlas and then start farming. So I needed to really get a good indicator of how the build was doing. The clear definitely still feels sluggish, but it is to be expected on this sort of investment. However, I was pretty happy with the single target. And even though we have no fizz mitigation, I've still only died once since getting to maps, and I think a lot of this is down to being used to the playstyle and knowing when to move and knowing when to stand and fight. So I decided once we completed that map, we would then make the effort to push the Pinnacle bosses and get those down. So the last thing I wanted to do before killing the first two bosses was get my spell suppression up and get Ailment immune. So I purchased some spell suppression gloves and then some boots that, along with Ancestral Vision, would make me Ailment immune. And I finished boots with 3 divines. They cost nowhere near that to craft, so I bought a fractured pair of movement speed boots for 20C. I then used a couple of greed essences on it to get life and a resistance. Then I crafted the remaining Ailment immunity that I needed. Then the last part of the boots was rolling the implicit using the Eater currency. As mentioned, I bought a pair of fractured spell suppression slink gloves. I needed some cold resistance, so I used some shrieking essences of hatred to get cold resistance and then just crafted life. And that was me good to go. Just purchased the Ancestral Vision Jewel and now I'm ready to take on the Pinnacle bosses and then map comfortably without worrying about ailments. So while the Exarch and Eater clips play out in the background, this seems like a good time to recap what sort of stats and gear I was looking for to basically ensure these fights were nice and smooth and that mapping straight after would feel good. So in terms of a bow, I was wanting something with 700 plus elemental DPS, 7.9% crit chance or better, and 1.5 attacks per second or higher. For the quiver, I wanted a high tier of crit multi and then as much flat damage, percentage damage, prod speed as I could for a reasonable amount of money. I've obviously mentioned 6 Ink Tornado Shot being important at this stage. I wanted a 2020 Tornado Shot gem and as many 2020 gems as I could afford. Me personally, I always want to be Ailment immune. I hate the feeling without it. So I wanted to get Ailment immunity through boots, the skill tree, and then the Ancestral Vision jewel. A cheap way for me to get damage in at this stage of the league is the Lionized Full jewel, so we've gone for that. I wanted Onslaught and Kill to make mapping feel better. I wanted to get a charm with base crit chance when at max power charges, and alongside that we obviously need power charges in the build, which is done through the Mana Forged Arrow setup. I wanted to be as close to capped spell suppression as possible, and ideally capped because it means obviously we're much tankier, and the more suppression you have, the less ailment avoidance you need on gear because of Ancestral Vision. With this setup, it's comfortable enough to do the bosses and some basic mapping strategies, but the character is very likely to die in juice maps with less than 4k life and pretty much no fizz mitigation. So the next step, which will be the next video, is to work out what Atlas strat I can do that doesn't need big defenses, but I can turn over some big currency to then either really boost the DPS to make dying less likely because we're killing everything, or add some defenses in the build to try and get an all-rounder. I think, personally, I'm probably going to go more glass cannon, but we'll decide that in the next episode. And that's kind of everything for this episode. Stopping at Eater Exarch makes sense because it would be good to go into the next episode explaining what I'm going to do to try and make some real currency. We do have essences on the back burner if we need to go back and farm some currency, which you might need to do to upgrade to Hyrris and a better bow and probably a better quiver. So I think if we can find 3 to 4 divines at the beginning of the next episode, upgrade those 3 items, then I think we're good to push to clear the Atlas and then start farming something that's going to get us 10 to 12 divines per hour. And then we can really look at how we want to upgrade the build. But in terms of what I wanted to go for, it was getting Ellie damage, which we've got through the Taming, Ellie damage on the belt, obviously on the bow and on the quiver, but we've got nothing special. The DPS is pretty bad. I would think single target all in is probably like 1 to 1.5 million, but you don't need a lot to farm red maps if you want to do an Alk and Go or Scour and Go strategy. I think I can comfortably double this DPS for 5 divines and then we're kind of good to go. So there's no special way I've built this character. I haven't really done anything with uniques. I wanted to keep it nice and simple so that if people wanted to follow, they're not going to come into roadblocks where, oh, he used this specific unique or he used this specific item and now 50 people have bought it and he bought it for 50c. It's now 5 divines. So don't want anything like that to happen. So that's why I've built it this way. I know there's probably tons of better ways to build it, but I didn't want to go using items that might go up a lot in price. So before we close out the video, we'll just quickly go over the Atlas again, which at the moment I'm keeping essences. I've got the Exarch altar nodes in case I want to farm those once we get some more maps completed. Then what I'm going to do is fill out my connecting map nodes so that I would have 100% with Wandering Path, then get some duplication nodes, and then we have options of what we want to do. We could altar farm with Wandering Path, or we can just unallocate Wandering Path and go back to white maps and farm essences. In terms of the currency at the moment, we're sitting on 3 divines with some chaos, and I've also got some essences worth a few divines as well. So with a little bit of farming at the beginning of the next episode, we're going to be able to make some decent upgrades. Again, they're going to be detailed what I do and why. And then lastly, in terms of the character, I'm sitting at level 89. I would hope that because we're not going to pick a particularly deadly Atlas strategy, that I can get that up to 90, 91, maybe even 92, because each level brings more power to the build. That's it for this video. We'll pick up again in the next episode, start clearing our Atlas and start clearing a ton of currency. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.